What is your opinion of the current administration's idea for tariffs? And good, bad? Are they going to hurt us in the end?
Oh, the tariffs in anything like the form that they're being described, they are going to be a disaster for the country. And frankly, they're going to end up hurting people worst at the lowest ends of the economic scale. So, I think it's awful. I mean, there are issues with tariffs that ought to be resolved. If someone is not treating you fairly, in some way, you can push back. But it's the sort of thing that needs to be done, with a scalpel instead of an atomic bomb.
Former Nashville mayor and Tennessee governor Phil Bredesen hasn't held public office since 2011. But as you just heard, he still keeps an eye on what's happening. As a Democrat governor in a red state, he sought the middle ground. His podcast with former Republican Governor Bill Haslam is a continuation of that. As mayor of Nashville, Phil focused on public spaces like the downtown library and worked to remake the core of the city into a destination. That included bringing pro hockey to town, then the NFL. And I'll bet you've never heard how they got to the final handshake on that deal. I'm Demetria Kaladimos, and it's Banner and Company. You first ran for office back in 1969 in Massachusetts.
In possibly the worst campaign for public office that has ever been run by any individual in the United States, anyway.
In what way?
I didn't know what I was doing and what it took, and I've always been a believer that the way you learn to do things is just kind of go out to the deep end of the dock and jump in and try to make it work, and that's kind of what I did and lost, but it was a learning experience and. And then, of course, I repeated that same learning experience right here in Nashville. What they say is really true, that you can learn as much or more from a loss than you can from a win. So from that standpoint, it got me at least in the water.
Yeah. What were the issues? It was 1969. The Vietnam War was still on. You had worked on a McCarthy campaign, right?
Yeah. The issues were, it was for the state senate in Massachusetts, and the issues were income tax. They have an income tax, but it wasn't graduated. Being a good liberal, I was for a graduated income tax. I might feel differently today. Mm-hmm. And drugs were a big issue. There was a time when marijuana was certainly still deeply illegal, and heroin and stuff was around. But those were the issues that I remember. Anyway. I had a chance later on to go back up there as governor, and we went to the state senate chamber, several governors, myself, on a tour. So I found the seat that I would have occupied if I had won and sat down in that seat. And so I've got this picture of me with about 4 or 5 other governors standing around sitting in that seat that I tried to win all those years ago.
Was it a good thing, though, at that age and at that time in your life that you didn't win?
Yes, no question. I think that when I've talked to young people who think about a career in politics, I said to them now, just, go out and get established in some way. You start doing that in your 20s, and, it's a very low income job by itself. And so, you're going to get tempted to make shortcuts and make compromises and that kind of thing. I think one of the strongest things I had going for me, as mayor in particular, and later as governor, was I already had a life and had gotten some financial independence, and it sort of frees you up to do things that if you were just afraid of losing this thing you had, this elected office, you never could do.
Yeah. It wasn't long after that. Well, it was a couple of years that you met Andrea.
It was a couple of years after that. Yeah, that would have been in 1970, I believe, and we met in 74. I want to say 73
How?
or 74. We worked for the same company, so I got to know her there. It would probably be frowned upon today, but it was kind of a workplace. Kind of a workplace romance. I mean, she didn't work for me or anything like that, but we were in the same place together, and found a lot of common interests in things, and then I moved off to went to the UK for a job there, and we tried carrying on a romance across the North Atlantic, before there was Skype or email or any of those kinds of things.
And long-distance telephones cost a
long-distance
fortune.
telephones were very expensive. We made ITT very happy, but other than that, I was thinking after about a year of that, and I came back, some on various things, and so we stayed together. But she came over, and we got married in the UK.
That sounds so romantic. Was it a lovely garden setting, or were you guys in the courthouse somewhere getting married?
No, it wasn't. It was somewhere between the two. We were married in a small church, but of course, I had somebody who worked for me in the company I was with be my best man, and she had another nurse that she knew be the lady, and there were four of us there. It was a very small wedding, and about 3 or 4 years ago we went back to that church. We hadn't been to it, in all those years, and had some nice memories of seeking that out and getting married there.
What was nice about the UK working, and what maybe was a little bit not so nice?
Well, I liked the UK. The lifestyle, it was not a great place to make a living. Salaries were much lower than they were in this country, and probably not anymore, but certainly at the time. But, the lifestyle there, I lived in a little cottage out in the country, Hope Cottage. It had a thatched roof on it, and a little yard, and that, and, the sort of pub life of going down and having a beer after work or something with some friends was very nice. There's nothing really like that in this country. So those were all things I really, really enjoyed. When Andrew and I got married, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'll go to work, and then after work we'll meet in the local pub and have a glass of beer and some food and all this kind of stuff. And that lasted about 2 weeks. And then Andrea decided she needed a job, and you couldn't get a work permit in the UK. It was impossible. So she ended up finding a consulting company in London that employed her to go to Saudi Arabia to train nurses. So fairly early on in our married life, she was flying off to Riyadh, and I was continuing to do what I did. But that went on for, I don't know, 3-4 months, and then it was time to move back to the U.S., and we did.
Nashville came calling, right?
Nashville came calling for her, actually. She in Riyadh, she met HCA people. They were building a hospital, the King Faisal Hospital in Riyadh. So she got to know some people from HCA. That's the connection with Nashville, and they offered her a job in the corporate office down here as the nurse who went out and solved problems with the directors of nursing and hospitals and that kind of thing. And so I had not been to Nashville. She had not been to Nashville, and we came back here, and she had a job with HCA, and I had no job, which she still reminds me of occasionally. And we showed up at the border of Tennessee in her Volkswagen with all of our possessions in it, and not knowing a soul in the state of Tennessee. And I can't honestly say that I was planning to spend the rest of my life here when we came, but we found it. We really liked it, and then I eventually got a job and started a career going, and we've found it. We're very happy we live here.
Paint me a picture of 1975 Nashville. I know early 80s Nashville, but I don't know the 70s very well.
Well, if you moved there from outside of London, it was like coming to the other side of the world. I mean, it was there were about 2 restaurants that you'd want to go to for any kind of a nice occasion. There was a French restaurant on West End Avenue I'm trying to think of the name of it now.
I think I do remember that.
And Mario's was here, and that was about it. But the housing was very nice. Houses were inexpensive. We had a really nice house, much nicer than we would have had in either England or in the Boston area, where we had been. We really enjoyed it. But it was a kind of a sort of a sleepy town. I much more so than I've been used to. I think people entertained by having people over to their house as opposed to going downtown to something or going out to a restaurant. And when I got to be mayor, that was really the driving force behind a lot of these kinds of things, just the feeling that, there's advantages to living in the city and some to living in the country. But one of the nice things about living in a city is there are public spaces you can go to and be with other people. So one of the things I really undertook was to say, okay, how do you create these public spaces where people can kind of, get out of their backyard and be out with other people and especially a lot of different people, not just the ones that happen to be your friends or your relatives. And I think we made some of that happen.
Yeah, that was sort of a culture. Didn't you call it public furniture?
Yeah. One of the things I said when I was mayor was that I thought what the city needed was more public furniture. I'd been in the business world, and the difference seemed to be, one of them was that if you had some extra money in Nashville government, the tendency was not to put it into capital things like you might in a business to make investments, but let's hire some more firefighters, or let's hire some more police officers, or let's up the pension plans, or something like that. So what I was really actively trying to do was say, no, we need to put money into some little larger buckets and use it to do things like the arena or like the libraries or like the parks. And that gives you the civic furniture that's the infrastructure you need for those public spaces that I thought were so important.
The library has held up, I think, famously well in terms of just, it's such a beautiful space, and there's nothing dated about it.
Right. No, I was very proud of that library. When that was toward the end of my time as mayor, and the downtown library was tough to get done. There was not much opposition to the reworking of the community libraries, the neighborhood libraries, and they were, I think, 5 or 6 of them were expanded dramatically from what they had been before. But there's a lot of pushback on downtown because it really hadn't become what it is now. And there were a lot of people just saying, well, libraries they're old-fashioned. The internet is going to replace all of that. And I never believed that for a moment, but that was a little bit of a lift. In fact, as I've thought back on it, the night the vote in the council was held on the library, the whole library thing, I think that was the only major vote that I didn't know how it would come out.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kaladimos. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
So 12 years after you moved to town, you run for mayor. Not council, not school board. You go straight for mayor. Was that by design? I mean, did you not want to kind of work your way up? Wasn't that the Nashville way to come up through the system?
Well, I had life is short. I had no desire to, if you'd asked me when I was in college, I would have said, going to Washington as a congressman or a senator or something was kind of the be-all, end-all job. And by the time, it came around to actually having the chance to run for something like that. I felt just the opposite, that sort of like nothing was happening in Washington, and all the interesting stuff seemed to be happening at the local level and at the state level. So I just decided to go for it, and fortunately, relative to what you were talking about before about when you start this political thing, I was in a comfortable position. I'd built a company up and sold it, and so you weren't worried about eating or making your mortgage payment while you were doing it, and that gave you some freedom to move ahead. I had built that business up, Health America, and sold it, and the real decision was for me is, are you going to reprise the same thing over and over again? I mean, I could have started number 2 and
Sure.
probably number 3 and so on. And so I just said, no, I don't want to do that. I mean, let me find something that's much more of a stretch. And, you might fail at it, but you need to stretch. And I did fail at it the first time, as you well know. And, I'm really glad I did that. I mean, it was a very rewarding time, and I think I really think I had a chance to make a difference in the trajectory that Nashville was on.
I always remember your campaign colors. I think you were one of the first people to go with green, and it really stood out.
Yeah. Well, it's just I always like to try to do things a little differently, and having red, white, and blue was like another 437 candidates or something.
Right. Yeah.
They were doing it, so we picked green, and it did stand out.
Tell us something that we don't know about the Titans deal. I know that it struck us in the news business we were all laughing, saying there's no way, when the rumors came out that this was going to happen within the next 24 or 48 hours. No one could believe it. And you pulled it off.
Yeah. I think back on that time as mayor, I was fortunate to be elected at a time that the city was really ready to move. It was a little bit of a sleepy southern city, but you had Vanderbilt here. You had a lot of vigorous business in town. I think they're ready to move. And I think that what worked was that my particular skills and background, which had been in the business world, was well suited to the needs at the time. I mean, if the problem at the time had been something, I don't know, deep racial divisions in the city, I wouldn't have had the experience to know, how do I do that? Maybe if I'd been a pastor or something, I'd know more about that. I wouldn't have had that. But when the opportunities are, well, okay, how do you move General Hospital over to Meharry, and how do you work at recruiting a team, and how do you get a library built, and those kinds of things. Those were things that I knew how to do. And so I think it was the right combination of where the city wanted to go and the particular skills that I brought to it. And certainly something like the Titans was a very complicated thing with a lot of moving parts and so on. But again, that's what I'd been doing.
Did you think it was for real or a bluff initially?
Well, if you remember, we built the arena.
Yep.
And then I worked at trying to get a pro team in the arena, which was focused primarily on basketball, which I thought was more likely, but also on hockey. And we were being used as a foil. Right? If somebody was unhappy, they'd tell their city, well, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to go to Nashville. And I knew we'd get some of that, although, if you're in political office, you can't afford too much of it. I mean, after the 10th time that happens, people start to get nervous. But what I had done was to put down just a term sheet. If a team will come to town, here's the kinds of things we'll do. And a fellow who was over at Opryland, a guy named Dick Evans, who was the COO over there, had previously run Madison Square Garden, and he helped me do that. We called on him to put it together. And that term sheet got moved all over the place. I think it was the first time somebody had actually done that. And I've seen copies of it, they're all speckled because they're the 17th copy of something of it. And Bud Adams got a hold of one, and one day called up and said, if we brought a football team to town, would you do the same things? And I said, sure, I'm certainly willing to talk to him. Went down and talked with him. And in the end, when I thought he might well be serious, we had a long lunch together at a restaurant here in Nashville. And somewhere during the afternoon, he brought it up again. And I said, well, I'm willing to go to the well for this and get out front on it if you're willing to sign an agreement with me that says you won't negotiate with anybody else, including the city of Houston, until we've sorted out whether we can do this or not. And when he said yes to that is when I first thought we might actually have something there. I mean, it could work or not work, but it had gotten beyond just using us as a foil for his negotiations in Houston. But he did that. He and I got along very well, which is kind of strange because you can't think of two people who are more different. It's just hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But we got along very well. I really liked him, and we were able to put things together to make it work. But a lot of times people think business deals are done on the golf course or something, and I think that is not actually mostly where it happens. I mean, it's so on. But in this case, it really was done in a restaurant and in the afternoon. And we found a common interest early on in Western art. He was a big collector of Western art, and Andrea and I had been, buying some paintings in New Mexico from, an artist out there or something who was doing something. And we sort of bonded on that, and we had some wine, and I put this proposition on the table of, sign this. You won't negotiate with anybody else, and we'll move forward. And he did. And that was when we wanted to make an announcement the next day that he was going to try to do it. And so we set it up for the Wild Horse, and I started calling around to people, probably including you, if I'm not mistaken, and saying that, we're going to announce a football team tomorrow, and people were just looking like, hey, has he lost his mind?
No, I've got to tell you, I mean, there was money on it that it was all an April Fool's joke or something like that.
Yeah. No, but he came down there and he stood up there on the stage with a martini in one hand and announced his intention of doing it. And there were a lot of lumps in the road along the way, but we eventually got it done. And I think it's been good for the city.
Absolutely. With that said, how do you feel about the new stadium going up?
To be honest, I don't know that much about the details of it. I mean, I'm somebody of... once you're out of it, I enjoy being in the kitchen cooking, but once you're out of the kitchen, I don't want to stand in the doorway and get that sort of look and so on. But I think on the whole, it's a good thing for the city. I think certainly, losing a football team or something would be a step backward for the city, and we shouldn't do it. I don't know the financial details of it, I'll be honest.
The location's great, though.
The location's great.
I'm glad that it's going up where the the team was kind of born here.
When we did the stadium, it was the same. It was the same issues as we had with the arena. I mean, with the arena, people were sort of okay with the idea of an arena, but not downtown. They wanted it out at the intersection of I something and I something somewhere outside the city. And the same was true with the football stadium. That they didn't want it over there. But for me, both of those things were in large part ways to get people downtown. And so that was really a part of the issue. When we started with the arena, one of the questions I asked was other cities who have tried to do this and failed, what happened? And so I made some phone calls to some people in some different cities where it had happened. And I say the common element was well, what happened is we got arguing about where it was going to go. Then you got all these interests in here of people who own land and all this kind of thing, and it fell apart over the location. So that was when we said, okay, we're going to build it. I'm open as to how big it is and how it's designed and all of this, but it's going here. And, pointed to that spot down there. And I think that was, in retrospect, very much the right thing to do. And it just cut out a lot of the things that became insurmountable problems in other cities. And we did exactly the same thing with the football stadium, which is, there's a lot of things to talk about, but that's where it's going, over there where all those sand piles are.
Can you imagine the Monday Night Football opening shot without that beautiful skyline?
I know there have been a few times over the years when something has happened, they just make you sit back and say, okay, I'm just going to relax and enjoy this for an hour. And the first time there was a night game there and showing the city skyline over the back, and I think it was a Monday Night Football game, I was shaking my head and said, this is really good.
It's Banner and Company. My guest is former Nashville mayor and Tennessee governor, Phil Bredesen. We'll be right back. You have also been instrumental in establishing places where we won't build things, ever. I'm talking about the Land Trust for Tennessee. Talk a little bit in the time we've got left about that and why that is so important. And how does it work? Does money change hands, or do people just, out of the kindness of their heart, say, you've got my land?
Well, I mean, it's all part and parcel of this idea that, we need public spaces. And, one of the very early things I did as mayor was to acquire some parkland. This was back when I first came in. Land was very cheap in Nashville, if you can believe it. And we sat down, called a group of people together, and sat down around that conference room table and just marked out some places in Nashville where there was land and we ought to try to get it. And the big one was where Shelby Bottoms is now. It's sitting over there. I think it was, I want to say, 800 acres. It was 800 acres of riverfront property within, throwing distance of downtown. It was $4 million.
Wow.
And I have no idea what it would be today, but so we went to the council and got the money and did that. And what is now Beaman Park was also in that category where it had been identified. I've always been interested in land conservation. I think just because I grew up in a rural area, and so much of my growing up was wandering out through the fields and that. And I didn't know about land trusts, but at one point, Andrea and I bought a lot in Wyoming that we were going to build a house on. And the lot was in a land trust, and I sort of said, what's that? And started looking into it. And it was one of those things you say, that's a really good idea. And, the idea is that people can contribute essentially an easement on their land to the land trust, saying, we won't build on this, or we can only build one structure, or whatever the restrictions are, to preserve it as open land for the future. That gets them a tax deduction, so they have there's a financial advantage to it. By the time it got started, which was the late 90s, toward the end of my time as mayor, you were starting to see, especially in Williamson County, there's a lot of development. A lot of these old family farms were turning into housing developments, and hated to see that happen to all of them. So we started the land trust, and literally in my living room, called some people together and sat down and talked about it. Jeannie Nelson had just come back from Washington, where she'd been the general counsel at the EPA, so she was an attorney and knew what she was doing on this stuff, and she was looking for something to do, and it worked out. It's worked out very well. It's turned into a very successful organization.
Is there land that you drive by or fly over, I don't know if you're still flying, where you say, boy, that would be prime for the land trust?
I think the land trust is one thing that I did with that, but also as governor, we acquired a lot of land. And I'd say probably that's more in the category. The land trust parcels tend to be smaller, a family farm somewhere. And but I literally one day was out flying on my own, and I flew down to Suwannee, and then kind of up along the Cumberland Plateau. And I looked down and saw all this land, and it was all broken up into these monoculture, pine things that they were raising for pulpwood or stuff, and it was such gorgeous country. And I just sort of thought, that's something it's going to disappear, and once it's broken up into ranchettes or something, it'll never get put back together again as this land. I found that land conservation was one of the few things where you could get ultra-liberals and ultra-conservatives to sit down at a table together. They both wanted to do the same thing with that. And so we actually, when I was governor, acquired a lot. I think it was a couple 100,000 acres of land, primarily up on the Cumberland Plateau area, to preserve it for the future. And whether you're an ecologist and you're interested in species preservation, or whether you're a hunter or a fisherman and you want your kids to have a place to go to do it, there was a common interest there that really made it possible. So I'm really pleased. We did a lot of park work in Nashville. The Land Trust has been successful in preserving a lot. And I think as governor, we put a lot of land into state ownership that's now available and won't be broken up.
So where's your happy place? Where do you go to get away from it all?
Oh, different places. To be honest, I love where I live. We've acquired some land around our house so that there's some places to go sit, and I love going down by the barn down there and sitting down with a book or something, just reading and getting away. I do like to fish, and we'll go and do that in different places. But anywhere I like being outdoors. Anywhere it's just kind of peaceful and outdoors I'm quite happy.
You fly fisherman or spin?
All of the above.
Okay.
It depends on where it is. If it's creek fishing, it's fly fishing for me. In a lake or something, it's a lot easier to use a spinning rod and do things, different kind of fish. But I like them all, and that's probably as close as you can get to just getting in the zone and forgetting about everything else.
Banner and Company is a production of the new Nashville Banner. This episode was produced, edited, and mixed by Steve Harouche. The original music is by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. We do a little thing on our podcast where the final question is in the fishbowl there.
Ah.
And it was left by a previous guest. I can't say, you can find out who and
So just pick
give it your best shot. Yeah, pick whichever one you think looks good.
All right.
The readers are coming out, folks.
Oh, I could read it without these. I'm
Of
just
course.
doing this for, effect. For Michael Shane Neal.
Oh,
Tell me about.
Tell me about the one person that made the biggest difference in your life.
Okay. This is almost like saying your favorite book is the Bible or something in one of these political questions, but it has to be Andrea. She's completely changed the way I saw the world and enabled me to go ahead and do so many things. It has to be Andrea.